In the quiet town of Willow Creek, where the only noise that pierced the silence was the occasional chirp of a cricket, lived an old man named Arthur. His house stood at the end of a dusty lane, surrounded by a garden that had once been a riot of color but now lay in a mournful shade of brown. Arthur's eyes, a faded blue, had seen enough winters to know the warmth of a spring sun was a fleeting friend. His wrinkled hands, stained with earth and time, tended to the garden with a gentle persistence that seemed almost futile. Each day he watered the shriveled plants and talked to them, sharing tales of his youth and the secrets of the town that had long since been buried with the leaves of forgotten autumns. His voice, a soft rumble, was the only companion to the creaks and groans of the house that had stood for centuries, bearing witness to the lives that had come and gone. The townsfolk knew Arthur as a peculiar character, often lost in his own world, but they respected his solitary nature. They would wave and exchange polite nods, but none dared to venture down his lane for fear of disturbing his tranquil solitude. His house, a two-story Victorian with peeling paint and a porch that listed to one side, was as much a part of the town's folklore as the whispers of the wind that danced through the ancient willows. The children of Willow Creek spoke in hushed tones about the man who could make flowers grow from the dead of winter, and the adults whispered of his late wife, Rachel, whose ghost was said to wander the halls, tending to the very garden Arthur had sworn to never abandon. Arthur's days were as predictable as the setting sun, a comforting routine that had kept him afloat since Rachel's passing. He would rise with the light, make a pot of tea, and sit by the kitchen window, watching the garden come to life. His mornings were spent in the company of his plants, his afternoons in the dusty embrace of his book-filled study, and his evenings by the crackling fire, the warmth a stark contrast to Rachel's cold, empty chair. The only variation in his life was the occasional visit from the mail carrier, who would leave letters and parcels on the porch before retreating to the safety of the known world beyond Arthur's gate. One such afternoon, as Arthur sat with a book titled The Language of Plants, a peculiar scent wafted through the open window. It was a fragrance that seemed to hold a memory of Rachel's favorite roses, a scent that had been lost to time and decay. He set his book aside and followed the scent through the house, his heart fluttering with a hope that had long since been buried. It grew stronger as he approached the back door, leading him into the garden where the source of the aroma lay, a single, vibrant rose in full bloom amidst the barren earth. He knelt beside it, his trembling hands touching the velvety petals, and for a brief moment he felt her presence beside him, her laughter echoing in the stillness. But as quickly as the scent had come, it vanished, leaving only a faint trace of something eerie in the air. The next day, Arthur noticed another change. The shadows in the garden seemed to shift with a life of their own, dancing in the corners of his eyes when he turned to look. He tried to dismiss it as a trick of the fading light, but the unease grew as the days passed. Whispers grew louder in the night, and the groans of the old house seemed to carry a new urgency. His sleep grew fitful, haunted by the specter of Rachel's ghostly visits. He found himself wandering the halls, his candle casting flickering shadows that mimicked her spectral form. Yet when he would enter her old room, he found only cold emptiness, the air thick with a sense of longing. The townsfolk began to notice Arthur's descent into a restlessness that mirrored the unsettled spirit of his home. His eyes, once a serene blue, now held a hint of fear that was as palpable as the thickening tension in the air. They offered him company, a cup of tea, or a helping hand in the garden, but Arthur waved them away with a forced smile that never reached his eyes. He knew he was not alone in his grief, but the solace he sought remained elusive, trapped in the pages of his books and the whispers of the willow trees that had been Rachel's confidants. One evening, as Arthur sat by the fireplace, the flames flickered and grew tall, casting monstrous shadows on the walls. A sudden gust of wind howled through the house, extinguishing the flame and leaving him in darkness. The silence was deafening, and then a soft voice, barely a whisper, called his name. It was Rachel's voice, unmistakable, and as clear as the day she had left him. He stumbled through the darkness, his heart racing, searching for her ghostly presence. But all he found was a cold, empty chair in front of the darkened window, and a single, withered rose petal at his feet. The realization dawned on him like a chilling dawn. The spirit in his house was not Rachel's, but something far more sinister that had been using her memory to taunt him. The following days saw Arthur's garden transform in a way that defied nature's usual rhythm. The plants grew tall and twisted, their leaves a sickly shade of green that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The once lifeless earth cracked and shifted as if something beneath was trying to break free. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones of the changes, and their eyes grew wary when Arthur's name was mentioned. They could sense the malevolent force growing in the heart of Willow Creek, and they knew it was connected to the old man and his haunted abode. Arthur, driven by a mix of terror and determination, turned to his books for answers. He pored over ancient tomes filled with arcane knowledge, desperate to find a way to banish the entity that had invaded his sanctuary. His research led him to a tome titled The Whispers of the Grave, a book so feared that it was said to drive men mad with the secrets it contained. It spoke of a spirit, a malevolent force that feasted on grief and despair, growing stronger with every passing day. The only way to rid oneself of such a curse was to confront it, armed with the power of pure love and the light of remembrance. With trembling hands, Arthur gathered the items needed for the ritual described in the book: a handful of Rachel's favorite roses, a candle made of pure beeswax, and a locket containing a lock of her hair. He knew he had to be strong, for Rachel's sake and for the town he had grown to love. As the moon reached its zenith, he ventured into the garden, the air thick with the stench of decay and the whispers of the restless dead. The plants shied away from his approach, and the very earth beneath him seemed to quiver with anticipation. Standing in the center of the twisted foliage, Arthur lit the candle and called out to the spirit, his voice carrying on the wind like a solemn chant. The shadows grew denser, coalescing into a form that was both Rachel and not Rachel, a twisted reflection of her beauty that sent a shiver down his spine. He held the locket up to the flickering light, the soft glow of the candle illuminating Rachel's smiling face. With a fierce resolve, he began to recite the incantation, each word a declaration of his love and a challenge to the spirit that had dared to taint her memory. The garden erupted into chaos as the spirit raged, the plants writhing and snapping as if in pain. Arthur stood firm, his eyes never leaving the locket, his voice never wavering from the ancient words that bound the spirit to his will. The air grew colder, and the whispers grew louder, but Arthur continued, pouring his heart and soul into the ritual. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos ceased. The garden fell still, the shadows retreating into the corners, and the candle burned with a brighter flame. Rachel's ghostly form hovered before him, no longer twisted, but a soft, comforting light that wrapped around him like a warm embrace. In a gentle voice, Rachel spoke to him, her words a warm breeze against his ear. "Thank you, my love," she whispered. "You have set me free. Remember me, but do not let your grief become your prison. Life goes on, even in the quiet corners of the earth." With a final kiss on his cheek, her light faded away, leaving Arthur standing alone in the garden, the candle casting a gentle glow on the first shoots of new growth pushing through the soil. The town of Willow Creek awoke the next morning to a sight that seemed nothing short of a miracle. Arthur's garden had bloomed overnight, a vibrant tapestry of color that seemed to chase away the shadows of fear. The townsfolk gathered around the gate, their whispers replaced with gasps of amazement. Arthur emerged from his house, his eyes clear and his step sure. He knew Rachel's spirit had moved on, and the malevolent force had been vanquished. The house no longer groaned under the weight of despair, and the garden sang with the promise of a new spring. Life began to return to normal, or as normal as it could be in the wake of such an extraordinary event. Arthur continued to tend to his garden, but now the task brought him peace rather than a haunting echo of the past. The townsfolk, their fears assuaged by the beauty of the blooming flowers, once again found comfort in his gentle presence. They shared stories of Rachel, their fondness for her growing with every retelling, and Arthur found solace in the warmth of their memories. The days grew longer, and Arthur felt a renewed sense of purpose. He decided to open his garden to the community, inviting children to learn about the plants and offering a quiet space for those in need of reflection. His house, no longer a symbol of sorrow, became a beacon of life, drawing in those seeking respite from the world outside. The townsfolk, in return, helped Arthur maintain the garden's newfound vitality, each one planting a seed of friendship in the fertile soil of Rachel's memory. But as the seasons turned and the first leaves of autumn began to fall, Arthur noticed a peculiar change in the garden's behavior. The roses, Rachel's roses, grew more vigorously than the rest, their thorns sharper and their scent more potent. He felt a pang of unease, a reminder of the spirit that had once sought refuge in her image. He knew he had to remain vigilant, for the whispers of the grave were never truly silenced. One crisp evening, as Arthur sat on the porch watching the sun set, the wind picked up carrying with it a faint echo of Rachel's laughter. He closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him like a gentle wave. When he opened them again, he saw a figure standing at the edge of the garden, a figure that was unmistakably Rachel. His heart swelled with hope, but the sight of her eyes, now a chilling, unearthly blue, told him that this was not his Rachel. This was the spirit that had been defeated but not destroyed. The figure beckoned to him, the candle in her hand flickering with a malicious intent. Arthur knew he had to act, not out of fear, but out of love for Rachel and the peace she had found. He stood, the locket warming against his chest, and stepped into the garden. The air grew colder, the whispers louder, but Arthur remained steadfast. He knew the true power of Rachel's love, and he was ready to face whatever darkness sought to claim her memory once more.